John Carter had once been a man of pride and purpose. Standing tall in his Marine Corps uniform, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew his mission mattered. He had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, facing danger head-on, risking his life for the freedom so many took for granted. But now, as he sat on a cold bench under a flickering street lamp in downtown Los Angeles, none of that seemed to matter anymore. The war had left its mark on John, not just physically but emotionally. Scars crisscrossed his arms, remnants of shrapnel wounds from an explosion that had claimed 2 of his closest friends. Those memories haunted him every night, replaying like a broken record in his mind. The loud bangs of fireworks could send him spiraling into panic attacks, and crowded places made his chest tighten with anxiety. Despite seeking help through veterans programs, John found it hard to adjust to civilian life. Jobs were scarce, rent was high, and the support systems he'd hoped would be there simply weren't enough. It wasn't long before John's savings ran out. Bills piled up, eviction notices came, and eventually he found himself living out of his car. When even that became unsustainable, he sold the vehicle and joined the countless others sleeping on park benches or hidden corners of alleyways. Each day was a battle, finding food, staying warm, avoiding trouble. It was exhausting, humiliating, and lonely. One particularly bitter winter evening, hunger gnawed at John's insides. He hadn't eaten anything substantial in days, surviving only on scraps scavenged from trash bins behind restaurants. His stomach growled loudly, a constant reminder of his desperation. As he shuffled past a small grocery store, the smell of fresh bread wafted through the air, teasing him cruelly. Inside the window display, loaves of golden brown bread sat neatly stacked, looking impossibly soft and inviting. John hesitated outside the door. He knew what he was thinking was wrong, stealing was wrong, but his body screamed louder than his conscience. Finally, unable to resist any longer, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The warmth of the store hit him immediately, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. His eyes darted around nervously as he approached the bread aisle. Grabbing a loaf, he tucked it under his jacket and turned toward the exit. But fate had other plans. Before he could leave, the store owner, a middle-aged man named Mr. Patel, noticed the movement. "Hey!" he called out sharply, stepping out from behind the counter. "What do you think you're doing?" John froze, caught red-handed. Shame burned his cheeks as he stammered, I'm sorry, I haven't eaten in days." Mr. Patel didn't look sympathetic. Instead, he reached for the phone and dialed 911. Within minutes, police officers arrived, handcuffing John and placing him in the back of their patrol car. As they drove away, John stared blankly out the window, feeling more defeated than ever. How had it come to this? From serving his country to being treated like a criminal, all over a single loaf of bread. News of John's arrest spread quickly. Local reporters picked up the story, painting him as either a tragic figure or a cautionary tale. Some people sympathized with him, arguing that no one should have to steal food to survive. Others dismissed him as another statistic, blaming laziness or poor choices for his predicament. What most failed to see, however, was the bigger picture, the cracks in the system that allowed heroes like John to fall through. As John awaited his court date, he couldn't shake the feeling of hopelessness. Sitting in a dimly lit holding cell, surrounded by strangers whose lives seemed equally broken, he wondered if things would ever get better. Would anyone care about his side of the story? Or was he doomed to be forgotten, just another faceless veteran struggling to survive? Little did John know, his story was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would change not only his life, but also shine a light on the struggles faced by countless others like him. Somewhere far away, a man known for his toughness and heart was reading about John's plight, and that man, Chuck Norris, wasn't the type to sit idly by when justice needed defending. The courtroom was a cold, sterile place, its walls painted in a dull beige that did little to inspire hope. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the faces of those gathered inside. John Carter sat slumped in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together as if trying to hold himself together. He wore the same clothes he'd been arrested in, tattered jeans and a faded jacket that smelled faintly of sweat and despair. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the judge seated high above everyone else, the stern prosecutor flipping through papers, and the public defender who barely seemed to notice him. Judge Emily Hartley was known for her no-nonsense approach to justice. A woman in her late 50s with sharp features and an even sharper tongue, she had earned a reputation for being fair but firm. To her, rules were rules, and exceptions were rarely granted. As she glanced down at John, there was no warmth in her gaze, only calculation, as though weighing whether this case deserved special consideration or not. The prosecutor, a young man named Daniel Hayes, stood up first. With slicked back hair and a perfectly pressed suit, he exuded confidence. "Your Honor," he began, his voice clear and commanding. "The defendant, Mr. John Carter, has admitted to committing theft. While the item in question, a single loaf of bread, is relatively insignificant in monetary value, the act itself is a violation of the law. If we allow such behavior to go unpunished, it sets a dangerous precedent. Where do we draw the line?" Hayes paused for effect, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Furthermore, the circumstances surrounding the incident cannot justify breaking the law. There are shelters, food banks, and resources available to individuals in need. Mr. Carter chose to take matters into his own hands rather than seek legitimate assistance. Therefore, we must hold him accountable." John flinched at the word chose. It sounded so simple when Hayes said it, as though John had willfully ignored all other options. But the truth was far more complicated. Shelters were overcrowded, often unsafe, and sometimes turned people away due to lack of space. Food banks ran out of supplies quickly, especially during the winter months when demand skyrocketed, and even if John had managed to access these services, they didn't address the deeper issues plaguing his life. His PTSD, his inability to find stable employment, his struggle to reintegrate into society after years of military service. When it was the public defender's turn to speak, a young woman named Lisa Chen rose hesitantly. She adjusted her glasses and shuffled her notes nervously before addressing the court. "Your Honor, while I understand the prosecution's concerns about upholding the law, I believe we must consider the context of Mr. Carter's actions. This is not a case of malicious intent or habitual criminal behavior. My client is a decorated veteran who served multiple tours overseas. He suffers from severe post-traumatic stress disorder and has faced immense challenges transitioning back to civilian life." Lisa's voice grew stronger as she continued. "On the night in question, Mr. Carter was starving. He hadn't eaten in days and saw no other way to survive. Does that excuse his decision to steal? No, but it does explain it. The system failed him long before this incident occurred. Instead of punishing him further, shouldn't we focus on helping him rebuild his life?" Her plea hung in the air, met with silence. Judge Hartley leaned forward slightly, studying John with narrowed eyes. For a moment it seemed as though she might soften, but then she straightened up, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Chen raises valid points," she said finally. "But the fact remains that laws exist to maintain order. Breaking them, regardless of motive, cannot go unchecked." As the hearing progressed, John felt increasingly invisible. The argument swirled around him, detached from the reality of his situation. To the judge, he was just another name on the docket. To the prosecutor, he was a statistic, a cautionary tale about the dangers of bending the rules. Even Lisa, well-meaning as she was, seemed more focused on winning the case than truly understanding him. No one asked how he ended up homeless. No one acknowledged the sacrifices he'd made or the battles he still fought daily. The final blow came when Judge Hartley announced her decision. "Given the evidence presented and the seriousness of the offense, I see no alternative but to proceed with sentencing. Mr. Carter, you are hereby remanded to custody pending further review. Bail is set at $500. John's heart sank. $500 might as well have been $5 million. He didn't have friends or family who could bail him out, and the thought of spending weeks, or possibly months, in jail filled him with dread. As the bailiff escorted him out of the courtroom, he caught sight of a reporter scribbling furiously in the back row. The media had taken an interest in his story, dubbing him the bread thief veteran. Some articles portrayed him sympathetically, highlighting his military service and current struggles. Others mocked him, calling him a disgrace to the uniform he once wore proudly. Either way, John knew he was nothing more than a headline to most people. Back in his holding cell, John replayed the events of the day over and over in his mind. Had he done something wrong? Yes. Did he deserve to be punished? Maybe. But what about the bigger picture? What about the countless veterans like him who slipped through the cracks, their sacrifices forgotten once they returned home? Why wasn't anyone talking about that? As the hours dragged on, John found himself staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. He wondered if anyone would ever care enough to make a difference, not just for him, but for everyone struggling to survive after serving their country. Little did he know, someone already had. Far away, a man named Chuck Norris had read about John's plight online. Known for his tough exterior and kind heart, Norris couldn't shake the feeling that something needed to be done. He picked up the phone, made a few calls, and booked a flight to Los Angeles. Justice, he believed, wasn't just about following the letter of the law. It was about doing what was right. And sometimes that required stepping into the arena yourself. The morning of John Carter's sentencing hearing arrived with a heavy gray sky, the kind that seemed to press down on the city like an invisible weight. The courtroom was already filling up when John shuffled in, his hands cuffed and his head bowed low. Reporters jostled for seats in the back, eager to capture every detail of what had become a highly publicized case. Cameras clicked quietly, and murmurs rippled through the crowd as people speculated about how Judge Hartley would rule. Would she show mercy? Or would she stick to her reputation as a strict enforcer of the law? John barely registered any of it. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the prosecutor's words from the previous hearing. Where do we draw the line? Hayes had asked. To John, the answer felt painfully clear. The line had been drawn long before he ever walked into that grocery store. It was drawn when veterans' programs ran out of funding, when shelters turned him away because they were full, when no one listened to his story or offered a helping hand. But here, in this cold, impersonal courtroom, none of that seemed to matter. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere shifted suddenly. A hush fell over the room, followed by a wave of whispers. Heads turned toward the entrance, where a tall figure stood framed in the doorway. Chuck Norris entered the courtroom with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to announce his presence. His mere arrival commanded attention. Dressed in a simple dark suit paired with his signature cowboy, hat, Norris looked both unassuming and larger than life. His piercing blue eyes scanned the room, taking everything in before settling on John, who sat slumped in his chair, oblivious to the commotion. For a moment, even Judge Hartley appeared taken aback. She adjusted her glasses and leaned forward, slightly, her curiosity evident. Norris nodded respectfully in her direction before making his way to an empty seat near the front. The reporters went wild, snapping photos and scribbling notes furiously. Who was he here to support? What did he plan to say? Speculation buzzed through the room like electricity. When the proceedings began, Judge Hartley wasted no time addressing the elephant in the room. Mr. Norris, she said, her tone formal but tinged with intrigue. May I ask what brings you here today? Norris stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. He removed his cowboy hat and held it in his hands as he addressed the court. Your Honor, he began, his voice steady and warm, I'm here because I believe justice isn't just about enforcing laws. It's about doing what's right. And sometimes that means looking beyond the surface to understand the bigger picture. His words immediately silenced the murmurs in the room. All eyes were on him now, waiting to hear what he would say next. Norris took a deep breath, his gaze shifting briefly to John before returning to the judge. This man sitting before you today is not just another defendant. He's a hero. a Marine Corps veteran who served 3 tours in Afghanistan, risking his life for our freedom. Yet when he came home, he found himself abandoned by the very system he fought to protect. He paused, letting the gravity of his statement sink in. Then, in a softer tone, he continued, "I'm not here to excuse his actions. Stealing is wrong and I don't condone it. But I do think we need to ask ourselves why someone like John, a decorated soldier, would feel so desperate that he resorted to taking a loaf of bread. Is it really fair to punish him without addressing the root causes of his situation?" The courtroom was utterly silent now, the kind of stillness that comes when everyone is hanging on every word. Norris stepped closer to the bench, his expression earnest. "I've spent my life honoring those who serve, whether through my work with veterans organizations or simply by listening to their stories. And let me tell you, Your Honor, John's story isn't unique. There are thousands of veterans across this country facing similar struggles: homelessness, hunger, untreated PTSD. They gave everything for us, and yet, too often, we turn a blind eye to their pain." Judge Hartley listened intently, her usual stern demeanor softened by Norris's sincerity. He wasn't shouting or making demands. Instead, he spoke with quiet authority, appealing to the humanity of everyone in the room. "What if, instead of punishing John, we use this moment to send a different message?" Norris suggested. "A message that says we value our veterans, that we recognize their sacrifices, and that we're willing to step up and help them when they need it most." To drive his point home, Norris pulled out a checkbook from his jacket pocket. With a few swift strokes of his pen, he wrote a check and handed it to the bailiff, instructing him to deliver it to the judge. "This will cover all court fees and fines associated with this case," he explained. "But more importantly, I'd like to offer additional financial assistance to help John get back on his feet: housing, therapy, job training, whatever he needs. Because if we can't take care of our heroes, then what kind of society are we?" The room erupted into murmurs again, this time filled with awe and admiration. Even the prosecutor, Daniel Hayes, looked visibly moved, his earlier arguments seeming hollow in light of Norris's impassioned plea. Lisa Chen, John's public defender, blinked back tears as she watched Norris return to his seat. For the first time since the trial began, there was hope in the air, a glimmer of possibility that justice might prevail in a way that truly mattered. John, meanwhile, sat frozen in his chair, overwhelmed by what was happening. He hadn't expected anyone to care this much, let alone someone like Chuck Norris. As Norris retook his seat, their eyes met briefly, and Norris gave him a small, reassuring nod. In that moment, John felt something he hadn't felt in years: seen. Not as a criminal, not as a failure, but as a person worthy of compassion and respect. Judge Hartley cleared her throat, bringing the room back to order. She glanced at the check in her hand, then at Norris, and finally at John. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a new softness in her eyes. Whatever decision she made next would define not only John's future, but also the legacy of this courtroom. And thanks to Chuck Norris, the scales of justice suddenly felt a little less tipped against those who deserved it least. The courtroom was silent as Judge Hartley adjusted her glasses and looked down at the papers before her. The weight of Chuck Norris's words lingered in the air, pressing on everyone present. Even the reporters, who had been furiously typing and snapping photos moments earlier, now sat still, holding their breath. This wasn't just another legal proceeding anymore. It had become something bigger, a moment where justice could either reaffirm its principles or evolve to meet human needs. Judge Hartley took a deep breath, her gaze shifting between John Carter, Chuck Norris, and the prosecutor. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried a tone of measured authority but also unmistakable thoughtfulness. "Mr. Norris," she began, addressing him directly, "your points are compelling. It is true that laws exist to maintain order, but they also exist to serve humanity. If we lose sight of that second purpose, then perhaps we have failed not only the individual before us, but the very ideals we strive to uphold." She paused, glancing at John, who sat rigid in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together. His eyes were fixed on the floor, though every muscle in his body seemed tense, as if bracing for impact. Judge Hartley continued, "Mr. Carter, you admit to committing theft. That is a violation of the law, and under normal circumstances, consequences would follow. However, this case has brought to light issues far greater than one act of desperation. It has highlighted systemic failures. Failures that leave veterans like you without adequate support after they've given so much for their country." Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply with everyone in the room. For John, it felt surreal to hear someone acknowledge his struggles so openly. He had spent years feeling invisible, dismissed as another statistic in a broken system. Now, here was a judge, one known for her strictness, acknowledging not just his actions but the circumstances that led to them. Chuck Norris leaned forward slightly in his seat, his expression calm but attentive. He didn't interrupt. He simply listened, knowing that the judge's next words would determine whether his intervention had truly made a difference. Lisa Chen, John's public defender, clutched her notes tightly, her knuckles white with anticipation. Even Daniel Hayes, the prosecutor, seemed uneasy, shifting uncomfortably in his chair as the tide of the courtroom shifted. Judge Hartley turned her attention back to John. "Mr. Carter, I cannot overlook your offense entirely. To do so would undermine the rule of law. However, I believe punishment alone will not solve the underlying problems here. What you need, and what countless others like you need, is support. Real, tangible assistance that addresses the root causes of your situation." With that, she reached a decision. "In light of the extraordinary circumstances surrounding this case, I am dismissing all charges against Mr. Carter. Furthermore, I am directing local veteran services to provide immediate aid, including housing, assistance, mental health counseling, and employment resources. Additionally, I will be convening a task force to review how our city supports returning service members. We owe it to people like Mr. Carter to ensure they are not abandoned once they return home." The room erupted into murmurs of surprise and approval. Reporters scrambled to capture the historic moment while Norris allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Lisa Chen exhaled sharply, visibly relieved, and even Hayes nodded in quiet agreement, recognizing the wisdom in the judge's ruling. For John, the relief was overwhelming. Tears welled up in his eyes as the reality sank in. He was free. Not just free from jail, but free from the crushing weight of judgment that had followed him for so long. As the bailiff removed his handcuffs, John stood slowly, unsure of what to do next. It was Norris who broke the spell, rising from his seat and walking over to him. "John," Norris said, extending his hand, "you're going to be okay. You've got a lot of people rooting for you now." His voice was warm and reassuring, cutting through the haze of emotion clouding John's mind. Hesitantly, John shook his hand, managing a weak but grateful smile. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know what to say." Norris placed a firm yet gentle hand on John's shoulder. "You don't have to say anything. Just focus on rebuilding your life and remember you're not alone in this. I'll make sure you get the help you need." True to his word, Norris wasted no time putting his plan into action. After leaving the courthouse, he accompanied John to a nearby shelter specifically designed for veterans. There he introduced him to counselors and staff members who promised to guide him through the process of finding stable housing and accessing therapy. Norris also personally arranged for John to receive a stipend to cover basic necessities until he could secure steady employment. But Norris didn't stop there. Over the following weeks, he stayed in close contact with John, checking in regularly to see how he was adjusting. He encouraged John to enroll in a job training program aimed at helping veterans transition into civilian careers. When John expressed interest in working with other struggling vets, Norris helped him secure a position at a community center dedicated to supporting homeless and unemployed service members. Word of Norris's involvement spread quickly, inspiring others to take action. Local businesses donated clothing, food, and supplies to veteran shelters. Charitable organizations launched fundraising campaigns to expand housing options for homeless vets. Even government officials took notice, pledging increased funding for programs tailored to veterans' unique needs. Norris's presence had sparked a chain reaction. turning John's story into a catalyst for change. As John settled into his new routine, he began to feel a sense of purpose again. For the first time in years, he woke up each morning with hope instead of dread. The nightmares didn't disappear overnight, but with therapy and support, they became less frequent. He started attending group sessions with other veterans, sharing his experiences and learning from theirs. Slowly but surely, he began to rebuild his life, not just for himself, but as a way to honor those who had stood by him when he needed it most. One evening, as John sat in his modest apartment, a place he now called home, he reflected on everything that had happened. From the cold streets of Los Angeles to the warmth of renewed hope, his journey had been nothing short of miraculous. And at the center of it all was one man, Chuck Norris, a man whose fame extended far beyond movies and martial arts, whose kindness and determination reminded John and countless others that true strength lies not in physical power, but in compassion and action. Though the road ahead would still have its challenges, John knew he wouldn't face them alone. For the first time in a long time, he believed in a brighter future, for himself, for his fellow veterans, and for a society beginning to recognize the value of those who sacrificed everything. John Carter's transformation didn't happen overnight, but the seeds of change were planted firmly in the days following his release from custody. With Chuck Norris by his side, both literally and figuratively, John began to rebuild his life piece by piece. The first step was securing stable housing. Thanks to Norris's connections and financial support, John moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, safe, and, most importantly, his own space. For someone who had spent years living on park benches and in abandoned buildings, having a place to call home felt like a miracle. The apartment came furnished with basic necessities: a bed, a table, a few chairs, and Norris made sure John had groceries delivered during his first week. But beyond the physical comforts, what truly mattered was the sense of dignity that came with having a roof over his head. No longer did John have to worry about where he would sleep or whether he'd be safe at night. That peace of mind allowed him to focus on other aspects of his recovery. One of the biggest challenges John faced was addressing his PTSD. Years of suppressing his emotions and avoiding triggers had left him emotionally drained and isolated. Therapy became a cornerstone of his new routine. At the Veteran Community Center, where Norris helped him find work, John met Dr. Evelyn Carter, no relation, a compassionate psychologist specializing in trauma. Their sessions started cautiously, with John often struggling to open up. But Dr. Carter's patience and understanding gradually broke down the walls he had built around himself. During one particularly poignant session, John recounted the explosion that had killed two of his closest friends in Afghanistan. His voice cracked as he described the deafening blast, the chaos that followed, and the guilt he carried for surviving when others hadn't. "I keep thinking," he said, tears streaming down his face, "that maybe I should have done more. Maybe if I'd been faster, stronger, they'd still be here." Dr. Carter listened intently, her expression soft but unwavering. "Guilt is a heavy burden to carry, John," she said gently, "but it's important to remember that you did everything you could in that moment. You survived because you're strong, not just physically but mentally. Your friends wouldn't want you to punish yourself this way. They'd want you to live." Those words struck a chord deep within John. For so long he had viewed his survival as a failure rather than a gift. Slowly, he began to shift his perspective, learning to honor his fallen comrades not through guilt, but through action. He threw himself into his work at the community center, dedicating his time to helping other veterans navigate their own struggles. Whether it was assisting them with job applications, connecting them with housing resources, or simply lending an ear, John found purpose in giving back. Chuck Norris remained a constant presence in John's life, checking in regularly to ensure he had everything he needed. Sometimes Norris would stop by the community center unannounced, bringing coffee and donuts for the staff and volunteers. Other times he'd call John just to chat, asking how things were going and offering words of encouragement. To John, Norris wasn't just a celebrity or a benefactor. He was a friend, someone who genuinely cared about his well-being. Norris also used his platform to amplify John's story and advocate for systemic change. In interviews and public appearances, he spoke passionately about the challenges faced by veterans like John, urging governments and communities to do better. "We send our soldiers off to war asking them to risk their lives for our freedom," Norris said during a televised interview. "But when they come home, we can't forget about them. We owe it to them to provide the support they need to thrive, not just survive." His advocacy sparked a national conversation. Cities across the country began re-evaluating their programs for veterans, allocating additional funding to expand shelters, improve mental health services, and create job training initiatives tailored to former service members. Nonprofit organizations partnered with local businesses to offer discounted housing and employment opportunities, specifically for vets. Public awareness campaigns highlighted the unique challenges veterans faced, encouraging civilians to get involved and make a difference. Back in Los Angeles, Judge Emily Hartley kept her promise to convene a task force aimed at improving veteran support systems. She invited experts, advocates, and even John himself to participate in discussions about how best to address the gaps in existing services. John shared his experiences candidly, emphasizing the importance of accessibility and compassion. His testimony resonated deeply with the group, inspiring concrete policy changes that benefited countless veterans in the region. As months turned into a year, John's confidence grew. He no longer saw himself as a victim of circumstance or a forgotten hero. Instead, he embraced his role as a survivor and advocate. He started speaking publicly at events, sharing his journey from homelessness to hope. His speeches were raw and heartfelt, filled with moments of vulnerability that resonated with audiences. People listened, not out of pity, but out of admiration, for his resilience and determination. One evening, after delivering a speech at a veterans gala, John found himself standing outside the venue, staring up at the stars. Chuck Norris approached him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Mind if I join you?" Norris asked with a grin. "Not at all," John replied, taking one of the cups. They stood side by side in comfortable silence, sipping their drinks as the cool, night breeze rustled the trees. "You know," Norris said after a while, "you've come a long way since that courtroom. I'm proud of you." John smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "I couldn't have done it without you, Chuck. You gave me a second chance when no one else would." Norris shook his head. "Don't sell yourself short, John. You're the one who put in the hard work. All I did was point you in the right direction. The rest was all you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city buzzed faintly in the background, its lights twinkling like distant stars. Then John turned to Norris, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Norris clapped him on the shoulder. "Anytime, my friend. Anytime." In that moment, John realized something profound. His story wasn't just about survival. It was about redemption, not just for him, but for every veteran who deserved a chance to reclaim their life. And thanks to people like Chuck Norris, Judge Hartley, and countless others who refused to look away, that chance was becoming a reality for more and more individuals every day. John Carter's journey from homelessness to hope didn't just transform his life. It rippled outward, touching countless others and sparking a movement that stretched far beyond Los Angeles. What began as a single act of kindness by Chuck Norris evolved into something much larger, a nationwide awakening to the struggles faced by veterans and a renewed commitment to supporting those who served their country. As John continued working at the Veteran Community Center, he became a beacon of inspiration for others in similar situations. Veterans who walked through the doors burdened by shame or despair saw in John a reflection of themselves, not defeated, but determined. He shared his story openly, never shying away from the painful parts, because he knew how important it was for others to hear that they weren't alone. "If I can turn my life around," he often said during group sessions, "so can you." One day, a young Army veteran named Marcus came into the center. Fresh out of rehab after battling addiction, Marcus was hesitant and withdrawn. unsure if anyone would understand what he was going through. But when John sat down with him and listened without judgment, Marcus broke down, pouring out years of pent-up anger and frustration. Over time, John helped Marcus enroll in therapy, find affordable housing, and secure a part-time job at a local church. Watching Marcus regain his footing gave John a profound sense of fulfillment, a reminder that helping others heal was its own kind of victory. Word of John's impact spread quickly, drawing attention not only locally but also nationally. Reporters eager to highlight positive stories amidst grim headlines flocked to interview him. Television shows invited him to speak about his experiences, and nonprofits asked him to collaborate on campaigns aimed at raising awareness about veteran issues. At first, John felt uncomfortable in the spotlight. He wasn't used to being praised or celebrated. For so long, he had been invisible. But over time, he realized that sharing his story could make a difference. Every speech, every article, every appearance brought more visibility to the challenges veterans faced, and inspired action. Chuck Norris remained a steadfast ally throughout this process, using his influence to keep the momentum going. He partnered with organizations like the Wounded Warrior Project and Team Rubicon to create programs specifically designed to address homelessness, unemployment, and mental health among veterans. Norris also hosted fundraisers, bringing together celebrities, business leaders, and everyday citizens to support the cause. One event, held at a packed arena in Texas, raised millions of dollars in a single night, all of which went directly toward expanding resources for struggling vets. Judge Emily Hartley, too, played a crucial role in sustaining the changes sparked by John's case. Her task force led to sweeping reforms in how cities approached veteran care. Shelters implemented specialized programs catering to the unique needs of former service members, including PTSD counseling and substance abuse treatment. Employment initiatives connected veterans with companies willing to hire them, while educational grants enabled many to pursue degrees or vocational training. Hartley herself became an advocate for policy changes at the state and federal levels, testifying before Congress about the importance of investing in veteran services. The ripple effects extended even further. Inspired by John's story, communities across the country began organizing grassroots efforts to support local veterans. In small towns and big cities alike, people came together to build tiny homes for homeless vets, host job fairs tailored to their skills, and create mentorship programs pairing veterans with civilians eager to help. Social media campaigns encouraged individuals to perform random acts of kindness for veterans, paying for their meals, offering free services, or simply thanking them for their service. These gestures, though seemingly small, carried immense weight, reminding veterans that they were valued and appreciated. For John, seeing these transformations unfold filled him with pride, but also humility. He knew he hadn't done it alone. It took a village, a network of compassionate individuals, tireless advocates, and visionary leaders to create lasting change. And yet, he couldn't deny the role he had played. His courage in sharing his story, his willingness to confront his pain, and his dedication to helping others had ignited something extraordinary. On the first anniversary of his sentencing hearing, the day Chuck Norris walked into the courtroom, John stood on stage at a gala honoring veterans advocates. The room was filled with hundreds of people, including Norris, Judge Hartley, and many of the veterans whose lives had been touched by the movement. As John stepped up to the microphone, the crowd erupted into applause. He waited patiently for the noise to subside, then began to speak. "When I walked into that grocery store a year ago," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, "I never imagined where my life would go. I thought I was at rock bottom, with no way out. But sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest opportunities. Because of people like Chuck Norris, Judge Hartley, and so many others, I was given a second chance. And because of that, I've been able to give back, to pay it forward to others who need help." He paused, scanning the room. "This isn't just my story anymore. It's our story. A story about resilience, compassion, and the power of community. We've shown that when we come together, we can make a difference, not just for one person, but for thousands. So tonight, I want to thank each and every one of you. Thank you for believing in me, for fighting alongside me, and for refusing to let our heroes be forgotten. The standing ovation that followed lasted several minutes with tears streaming down faces throughout the room. When John finally stepped off the stage, Norris greeted him with a firm handshake and a warm embrace. "You did good, John," Norris said softly. "Real good." In the years that followed, John's legacy continued to grow. He traveled the country, speaking at schools, conferences, and military bases about the importance of supporting veterans. He co-authored a book detailing his journey, with proceeds going to veteran charities. And he remained deeply involved in the community center, mentoring new staff members and ensuring that no one slipped through the cracks. Meanwhile, the broader movement he helped inspire gained unstoppable momentum. Legislation was passed to improve access to health care, housing, and education for veterans. Corporations pledged to hire more former service members, recognizing the value of their discipline, leadership, and problem-solving skills. Entire neighborhoods sprang up dedicated to providing affordable, supportive housing for vets and their families. Slowly but surely, society began to shift, from forgetting its heroes to celebrating and uplifting them. Looking back on everything that had happened, John felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the second chance he'd been given, but for the opportunity to make a difference. He had started as a man desperate enough to steal a loaf of bread, haunted by his past and uncertain about his future. Now he was a symbol of hope, proof that even in the face of overwhelming odds, redemption was possible. And as he stood on the balcony of his apartment one evening, watching the sun set over the city he now called home, John smiled. The road ahead would still have its challenges, for him, for other veterans, and for the world at large. But thanks to people like Chuck Norris, Judge Hartley, and countless others who refused to look away, the path was brighter than ever. Together, they had proven that true strength lies not in turning a blind eye to suffering, but in stepping up to meet it head-on. And in doing so, they had created a legacy of hope that would endure for generations to come.